In 1905, the Seventh Zionist Congress chose Palestine to establish a Jewish national home, after considering Uganda and Argentina. Itzhak Epstein delivered a speech, saying they'd forgotten, quote, one small detail, that there is in our beloved land an entire people that has been attached to it for hundreds of years and has never considered leaving it. He added they were committing a grave psychological mistake. Herzl had died a year before this Congress met. The president of the Union of British Synagogues had written to Herzl that he shuddered at the idea of founding a tiny Jewish state that would become a ghetto.
At
the start of the century, there were several tens of thousands of Jews there and about 500,000 Arabs.
The Jews weren't cultivating the land. Many Jews were ultra-Orthodox and received donations from abroad. Or they were merchants. That's how it was.
There was a small, deeply devout, ultra-Orthodox community, mainly in Jerusalem or other places like Hebron and Safed.
Relations between Arabs and Jews were good, without a doubt. There was no issues buying land and houses, for example. That happened and was quite normal.
My parents who were living in Jaffa had many friends amongst the Jewish population of Mandate Palestine. These things at that time were natural. They were not anything unusual.
In my view, there's no reason to deny that Jews lived there. They had their own culture and institutions.
The anti-Semitic pogroms in Russia drove Jewish people to immigrate, to the United States in particular. A small group of young Zionist students from Ukraine decided to settle in Palestine.
One group arrived, bought land in Rishon LeZion, and stayed there. That was one of the strangest things. Jews said from the start, "This is our land." And the Arabs heard that. So the moment the first Jews arrived in that initial wave of immigration, the Jewish-Arab conflict began.
In that regard, the seeds of hostility and conflict were sown from the very start.
Idealist young men came to cultivate the land. They wanted to establish a model settlement in Israel.
Documents from 1907-1908 say this is an enormous project to drive us out of our own land.
The working conditions in this underdeveloped country, in areas that were cut off from civilization, propelled people to establish a common way of living. And this led to the concept of a kibbutz.
The first kibbutz, a rural collective settlement, was established in Palestine in 1909. The young, idealistic founders from Europe envisioned a new state and way of living.
My grandfather toiled away in mud up to here, planting eucalyptus trees to drain the swampland. My grandmother broke gravel with a hammer. They lived in a tent for 5 years.
The Western world considered Palestine uninhabited and disregarded its residents. To many in the West, Palestine was a barren, desolate land filled with deserts and marshes.
There's a famous saying, "The bride is beautiful but married." They could not bring themselves to accept that. So how could they justify people from the outside coming to settle in a country where people were already living? At the time, a slogan was spread across the world: "A land without a people, for a people without a land." That was the great big lie.
They claimed they turned this land into a paradise.
There
was a notion of it was just desert before, it's a good thing we came, and so on. This story of a desolate wasteland dates back to the 19th century. That's when the European powers started describing the sacred land as a bleak desert that had to be brought back to life at any cost.
The Muslims weren't distrustful until the start of the Zionist movement. They never imagined that one day their relationship to the Jews would change in this way and that the Palestinian people would be the ones to lose out.
The Jewish settlement contributed in part to the worsening relations between Arabs and Jews. And that's because the Jews chose not to employ Arab workers.
שהתכוונה להשתמש בעבודה ערבית.
As the Zionist movement gained momentum, more and more Jewish people purchased land in Palestine. Between 1908 and 1913, 11 new Jewish settlements were established. It was during this same period that Arabs started pushing back. Many protested the sale of land to Jews.
All of the Palestinian Arab leaders sold land to the Zionists. It's documented.
They started acquiring land, and people realized there was a problem. How are you going to live in peace with someone who comes along and wants to create a Jewish state? Whether or not he buys land, he doesn't want a Jewish Arab state. He wants a Jewish state only.
There was immediately tension, and the tension rose with every wave of immigration. And the more the Arabs sensed the land was slipping through their fingertips.
World War I reshaped the geography of the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire was defeated. With the exception of Turkey, the Middle East was carved up and managed by Western powers. The Sykes-Picot Agreement, a secret treaty between France and Britain, assigned Palestine to the British, making it mandatory Palestine.
The British were responsible for making it possible for the Jewish people to have a state in Palestine, not to speak of the Balfour Declaration, which also promised the land to the Jews.
The British wanted to guarantee a Western presence in the area. In November 1917, British Foreign Secretary Arthur James Balfour wrote an open letter to Lord Lionel Walter Rothschild, one of the leaders of the Zionist movement. Balfour wrote, "His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine."
The Balfour Declaration is the declaration of a colonist offering someone else a gift that he had no right to give.
In 1917, just when the British government embraced the Zionist project to create a national home for the Jews in Palestine, Palestinians represented 98% of the population.
The most telling figure was from 1919, when Britain took control of the country. They conducted the most serious population census. In 1919, there were 700,000 Arabic speakers, meaning Arabs, and 70,000 Jews.
Right from the start, the British were acutely aware that in order to stay there a long time, they'd have to divide the country. The first act of division was absolutely perverse. In their first census, they created categories that hadn't existed before. They made a Jewish category and an Arab category. And that was how it continued. It followed the principle, if we make sure they are fighting each other, we can referee this game forever.
The first waves of anti-Jewish unrest swelled in March and April of 1920 in Jerusalem. More protests continued in May 1921 in Jaffa and Tel Aviv. More than 50 people were killed. Winston Churchill, then British Secretary of State for the colonies, investigated the incidents. In 1922, he published a white paper clarifying the British stance on Palestine. In July 1922, the League of Nations gave Britain a mandate to begin creating a Jewish national home. Between 1924 and 1928, more than 60,000 Jewish people arrived in Palestine.